In the 1960s, the big thing for studios to do was to create these large-scale, widescreen, long-form epic comedies, such as The Great Race and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. During this same time, the Western genre couldn't be left out of this mix, and that's when John Sturges directed Hallelujah Trail. This movie is a visually sweeping production and was released in a special film format called Ultra 70 Panavision. The story was based on a comedic novel by William Gulick. Not only did this movie have a prestigious director in Sturges, it also had an impressive cast that was signed on with United Artists to make this film, the biggest being Burt Lancaster. He got top billing. But the only reason you're seeing Burt Lancaster in this film is because he got dragged into doing the film as a part of a financial commitment that he owed to the studio that stemmed from losses incurred by his own production company. Consequently, he had to make multiple films with United Artists at the bargain rate of $150,000 per picture. He's said to have been in a terrible mood during the entire filming of this production, and probably rightfully so. He felt like he was forced to do it, and it wasn't something that he was happy about doing. The story is set in 1867, when the boomtown of Denver is going through a crisis. It seems the local miners are rapidly depleting the local supply of whiskey. If they can't get a new shipment, they will have to suffer through the approaching winter months in a dry town until the deliveries can resume in the spring. It's decided to make a bold gesture by hiring a whiskey magnate named Frank Wallingham, played by Brian Keith, to form a wagon train to deliver the booze to Denver. The only problem is with this that it requires them to travel through some pretty rough areas, landscapes that are controlled by hostile Indians. Wallingham then uses his political connections to ensure that the U.S. Cavalry Detachment is sent to meet the wagon train and escort them to Denver. That job falls to Colonel Thaddeus Gearhart, played by Burt Lancaster, who is not really too pleased having his men act as personal bodyguards for a profit-making enterprise. Adding to his terrible woes in this situation is Cora Templeton Massingale, played by Lee Remick. She's a noted feminist leader of the all-female temperance movement. Cora, with her followers, insist on accompanying the cavalry unit so they can attempt to dissuade Wallingham from making the delivery of the whiskey. Gearhart is a widower who is trying to raise a sexually precocious teenage daughter named Louise, played by Pamela Tiffin. And she's romantically involved with Captain Paul Slater, played by Jim Hutton, who is a key member of her father's unit. This situation worsens when Louise becomes a convert to Cora's cause. This plotline involves all sorts of chaos and slapstick that occurs when the cavalry, temperance protesters, and attacking Indians all converge with the wagon train in a big shootout in the desert. The film is presented in a pseudo-documentary style with a tongue-in-cheek narrator providing historical background and context, and periodically interrupting the story to point out animated charts illustrating strategic positions of the various groups. According to the screenwriter of the film, John Gay, Doris Day was interested in the role that ultimately went to Lee Remick. Now maybe Burt Lancaster would have gotten along with Doris Day better in this film because he didn't get along with Brian Keith or Lee Remick at all. And I don't know if it was their personalities. I think it was probably more the fact that Burt Lancaster just didn't want to be there for the price that he was there. During the location shooting of the film in New Mexico, the crew was confronted with some of the heaviest rainfall in that region in 50 years. It washed away the tents as well as sets and props. It completely tore the set up. Now, John Sturges was really wanting to make this Western comedy, but after his first public screening, 90% of the audience were asked what they thought about the film, and they were really wondering whether these situations were supposed to be comedy or not. Sturges was deeply disappointed and upset in the way the screenings went. Some theaters, when they ran this film, decided to shorten it down from 165 minutes to 145 minutes. And they did this to optimize the daily ticket sales. Now, this movie is a perfect example of a movie that would be perfectly done in a 90-minute time frame. In fact, Sturges did just that with the 1962 Rat Pack Western Sergeants 3. The problem with this movie is that it's just packed with all sorts of additional padding that shouldn't be there. And this is done to justify its length as a Cinerama production. Consequently, you have scenes and repetitive comic situations that drag on just endlessly. By the time that the intermission comes, the battle in the desert, in which thousands of shots are fired without anyone being injured, is a cinematic equivalent to taking a sleeping aid. The Hallelujah Trail isn't an awful film, it's just overblown. It's got too much hype in it. The actors perform great throughout, and there's really a marvelous supporting cast. Among one of those is Donald Pleasance, and he really shines as a phony oracle who reads fortunes in return for booze. The almost always reliable Martin Landau, however, is completely saddled with the role of a comedically drunk Indian that is literally cringe-inducing to watch. But there is a really good score and title theme that was done by Elmer Bernstein, and the cinematographer Robert Sturges does an excellent job catching these magnificent landscapes. Now, the sad thing about this film is that stuntman Bill Williams was killed performing a stunt with another colleague during the shooting of this film. The stunt called for Williams and another stuntman to guide a horse-drawn wagon toward a cliff. As the horses separate, both men were supposed to jump clear as the wagon continued over the cliff. Bill Williams did not manage to jump clear in time, and he died as a result. Now, I've read two different things as how he died. One of them says that he actually got ran over by the wagon. The other one says that he went over the cliff. So I'm really not sure what happened. As you can imagine, this completely floored the cast and crew. They were upset for days. They canceled production the day it happened, but they did resume it the very next day with some pretty solemn faces during that first startup. Now, that sequence of the movie was supposed to be deleted when it was edited. John Sturges wanted that, but the producers insisted on keeping that in the movie as well as in the trailer too. This is a sad remembrance of where this stuntman, Bill Williams, gave his life to give us action-packed movies. On October 19th, 1968, 3 years and 4 months after its release, the film had its television premiere in a 3-hour time slot on the NBC Saturday Night at the Movies. It's pretty obvious that in this movie, and I usually don't get too critical on some of the movies, and don't get me wrong, this film is still enjoyable to watch, but they just pushed it way too much, and the recipe just wasn't there. Lancaster just looks understandably bored to death, and Lee Remick is completely miscast and wasted in this role. The critics were pretty rough on this show, calling it absurdly inflated, prolonged, and a really uneventful comedy western. Now, if you're a big F Troop fan, you might really like this comedy. It's kind of in the same vein. And I loved F Troop. Matter of fact, we're going to be doing a video on that TV sitcom pretty soon. So if you can get past the length of this movie and some of the hoopla in it, and if you did like F Troop, I think you might still enjoy this film. And you got to realize it's done by a great director and some pretty talented actors. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.